Welcome back to Candid Conversations. Today we're talking about chapter 6. This is the 7th in our podcast series on the book Candid, which is available in all places that you buy books of high quality. If it's not there, it's probably not a high quality bookstore. Anyways, today we're going to share really how you build this engine to get feedback, right? And how you do it well.
Building a feedback system.
Which actually makes me think about it. Thinking of engines, consider a car for a second. Right? Imagine if you were to build a car and then afterwards decide where a steering wheel should go and decide how a steering wheel should work. Right? How effective do you think you could be at getting the steering wheel to do what you actually wanted it to do?
Yeah, probably. I could see a lot of poor scenarios.
Yep.
I'm just trying to think of what I would do, because it doesn't have to be a steering wheel, right? Just
No, it could
how
be
do I
anything.
steer this car? Right?
How do you move the car?
My dumb mind goes straight to 2 additional pedals.
You like,
Yeah.
that's how you steer airplanes on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
Pedals, right? Yeah. Now the real question is, when you move a steering wheel in a car, what actually changes? Anyone know? Now I admit I am wading into levels of ignorance here. So when there's actually like a mechanic that's like, you guys are dumb.
People know my ignorance either.
It's all your system of my assumption. I again have not designed a car, but it's a shaft that goes down, hits a gear that's gonna twist the wheels left and right on those rods.
Yep. Now, interestingly, for anyone that remembers the Hummer crab walk videos with LeBron James,
Oh yeah.
very seminal moment in our lives, I'm sure. Most cars don't move all 4 wheels.
Right.
They just move the first 2. And so one of the interesting things about designing anything, whether it's a car, whether it's a feedback system, whether it is, a quality relationship with someone, is understanding what will change when I do something. When I turn this wheel, what's actually going to change? Right? And so using that analogy to think about feedback loops, we often, and feedback systems, we often start with building the engine, picking the upholstery we want the seats to be, putting in the windshield before we actually think about what's the steering wheel going to do? What are we actually going to change?
Mm-hmm.
More to the point, what are we going to allow to be changed in our organization based off this feedback? Because there are some things that are probably off limits, right? Somewhere in our book, we talk about a story of mine where I went to a conference, a Pluralsight conference in Salt Lake City, right? And Ellen DeGeneres was there. Right? There was a whole bunch of people there. They were awesome. Like I think it's Adam Savage is from Mythbusters.
Yep.
Fantastic. Alex Honnold, amazing. Right. Ellen DeGeneres, people were packed. I thought it was going to be fantastic. It was one of the worst keynote things I'd ever heard.
Cool. There's some feedback for you.
For a bunch of things, mainly because it was all about Ellen. Like there was nothing that was applicable. It was just, I don't care. Like, I don't understand how that was going to help me, where the rest was like, here's how I climbed this giant mountain. Here's how you can too. Ellen's was, I'm Ellen and I'm Ellen. And that was basically the end of it. And so at the end of this, they did a Q&A, right? So the CEO of Pluralsight got up and said, hey, if I could get any feedback from you of what we should do to make our organization better, what would it be? And her answer to him was resign.
Dang.
Yeah. Because she wanted someone different, someone minority, a woman, somebody different to be there. Now,
she was trying to say, right, change the power structure in
yes,
your organization.
Get it.
Yeah.
I understand her sentiment, but it's a fascinating thing that was never on the table. The feedback that is given, right? That feedback was utterly pointless because of that. Right. Because it was something that was never on the table to actually change. Now, whether or not he should have resigned or whatever, that's beside the point. The point is, you need to decide in your organization what's actually on the table before we build a feedback system. And I would encourage you to look beyond the norm of what's on the table. Maybe some things that you didn't think would be on the table will be. But if you can understand what you actually want to have change, what you actually want to have improve, what things your hands are tied with, then you come in with the right expectations to be able to build a system that matters.
Yeah. And I maybe slightly feel bad, but not all that bad. We harp on this all the time. I think it's come up in every single podcast of don't start with the questions, start with what you're willing to change is really what you're saying.
Totally.
Start with how we're going to close the feedback loop and notify people that we're listening to the feedback that we're going to start asking for or thinking about asking for. So you're really describing start with the end in mind.
Yeah, I think that's exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. When you start at the end in mind, you know where you're trying to get to.
Yeah.
And one important thing to think about here, most nonprofits, most social services, and frankly, just most organizations, and really most humans, when we start asking for feedback, we're not actually asking for feedback, we're asking for reassurance. Think of the question that we've brought up a bunch of times here because it's just cliche and funny and it points us out. But if I go and say, does this shirt, does this dress, does whatever make me look fat? No one wants a real answer to that question.
Mhm.
They want reassurance.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with just getting reassurance is it doesn't speak the truth. And if I'm getting reassured of things that are wrong, I'm just moving perpetually in the wrong direction and possibly farther and farther in the wrong direction. And so as an organization, we need to do the work to be able to say, okay, we don't want to be reassured. We want real feedback. And in order to get that, we need to decide this is what can change. And here's the areas we're going to be gathering feedback in. And so, as we start getting into like, how do you actually craft feedback questions and things like survey questions, stuff like that to build that feedback? Well, it's a lot easier when you know, hey, we can change the food. We can change the cleanliness. We can change the staffing. We can change these things. If you can't change those things, it doesn't make a lot of sense to ask questions about that. Right?
Yeah.
Because
kind of that old adage, don't ask a question that you don't already know the answer to. And in this case, it's okay to ask those. But in this case, it's don't ask a question about something that's off limits that we're not going to change.
Yep. And a really good way to think about this is if tomorrow you got a great piece of feedback about something, right? Would you be willing to change the thing it's talking about? Right? So if I learn tomorrow that something isn't working, would I be willing to pay the cost to change that thing? If not, then it's not worth asking the feedback about.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And I hope everyone that's listening to this or watching it doesn't think in this scenario, we're talking about the optimal system, the optimal program, optimal organization,
optimal state of mind.
Probably, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think you're going to have oscillation. Everybody does, right? It's kind of like thinking about, there's that old kind of joke of pride and humility. Like as soon as you think you're humble, you're prideful, right? And type of thing as you go through it. But it's the same thing of like organizations can go in and out of being ready to gather feedback in basically the same moment.
Yeah. I would say that's like, be okay putting things off limits. And to your point, Blake, here's what we're not going to do, or we're gonna optimize for this, or this, or we're looking for optimization in these areas. Let's not waste time elsewhere because we don't have the bandwidth to do what we need to do there. Now that said, that you should definitely take every piece. I guess the thing that should always be on the table is take every piece of feedback seriously and seriously have a plan for how you will notify or close that feedback loop.
Oh, 100%.
Definitely able to do one thing there, be able to do that while still keep all of your off-limit things off limits.
Yep. And one of the things is to maybe get granular in what can change, right? You may say, well, we can't change the food we're serving. Okay. Can you change how it's served? Can you change the portions?
Can we change
the
temperatures?
The temperature? Can you change the time? Can you change when people get it?
Mm-hmm.
And are you sure you can't change the things that you think you can't change? All of those are good questions to ask in building these processes. And it's the conversations and changes that those come up with that really add a lot of value to a feedback engine.
Some of the coolest changes that I've seen recently is around kind of the food pantry idea. And maybe it's that I've been sheltered up to this point in life. But I have seen food pantries and been to them. It's very like warehousey and
sure.
Traditionally. the recent ones that I've been to, and it's through feedback, is that's why I was there as clients of ours. They said, why they got feedback like, hey, this feels like I'm just picking up secondhand food that came out of a dumpster and got thrown into a box. And it's like, this is what people don't want. And someone took that piece of feedback and says, yeah, you're right. Why don't we make this like a grocery store, a marketplace? And it is legit. Their food pantry is a marketplace. It's a whatever you think of a normal grocery store, it's just that miniaturized. They've got shelves, they've got candy in a section, they got drinks in a section, and it feels good being in there. Like, I would shop here if there were prices on these things. In this case, there weren't. So
Shout
really
out
cool.
that organization who
Yeah.
they knew who they are in California. They're kicking butt, doing their awesome stuff there. But yeah, it was really cool. A really cool way of thinking outside the box.
Yep.
Right. And so I think the important things, just to review, determine what you can actually change. And then before you put those in cement, challenge those assumptions. You might come to the conclusion that no, those are actually there in cement. Or you might say, you know what, actually we can be creative here. Let's ask for feedback around these, because there's a few things we could change based off of some of these type of things. So that's I think the groundwork to lay when building a feedback engine.
So when we're talking systems, and process is really a system.
Yep.
What should other organizations be asking themselves? Like, how do I build a system? And probably if I'm that, speaking of pride and humble, if I'm the prideful person that I am, I'm going to be like, do I even need a system? Can I just cobble this together myself?
Or more dangerous, go back and listen to our previous podcast. Do I fall in that boat where I think I already know?
Yeah.
Right. Because I'm close to it. So I think I already know the feedback that I'm going to get. And so therefore I just make that jump where it's like, I don't, I know what's best for whoever. Yeah, it's a good question.
And we've mentioned it already, but having the end in mind, but also what are we willing to change? What are we willing to actually do? But how can we actually get people to respond? So what questions do we actually ask? And how do we know what the right questions are to ask? I imagine that's a hard spot to be in for them, is like, I don't even know how to ask the question, what question to ask. I don't know how to word the question.
Yep. And we actually do with our work, we do lots of these survey consults, what we call it. But basically it's helping people ask questions in a way that will help them get responses. Right. And there's a few very basic ways to do this that I think are worth reviewing. Right.
I've got some of them listed here. The ones that we call out is purposeful, immediate, convenient, scalable, and psychologically safe. So those are the 5 kind of design focus when you're designing a feedback system, things that you should focus on. Is there ones that are I guess really that are most important for organizations to focus on?
You're asking me to pick a favorite child?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. You're supposed to do that, right?
It's really hard. Your
It's
favorite
not
child
Abigail right
changes,
now,
I
Mark.
think, don't let her hear this.
She doesn't have a phone. She won't.
Right. That's a joke from the previous podcast
Yeah,
for
go
those
back
of
and
our
listen.
dedicated listeners here. It is really hard to say any one of those are more important than the others. It's like talking about load-bearing walls in your house. Like, you don't have a favorite load-bearing wall in your house. You need the freaking roof to stay up, right? And so each one of them is that opportunity to keep that roof above your head, and you need them to bear the load. And without it, something's going to break. Something's going to fall apart. And so, like, if you think about this, the first one was purposeful, unless I'm mistaken. If you're just asking questions without a purpose, you are unlikely to get feedback that actually matters, that fits that mold of what we were just talking about, things that you can actually change. General feedback questions get general answers. The more specific you get, the more specific answers you get. Now, specificity, oh, that's a hard word. Specificity, I think I said it right the first time, is valuable, but it's not the be all end all, right? So if you just focus too much on purposeful, you might miss out. You want to make something narrow enough to be valuable, wide enough to get feedback, right? So that narrow enough and wide enough. What was the next one? Purposeful was the next one. What was the next one on your list?
Immediate.
I think we've all experienced this, but when you're in the moment, the emotions, the thoughts, all those type of things are going to be much more poignant and powerful, and you're going to share them. A lot of times when you are distant from it, you maintain the overall, I didn't really like that, or that was great, but it's a lot harder to articulate why. And so the quicker you are to allow people to give feedback to the experience that they've had, the better articulated they can explain why they had it. So you're going to get less just, it was good, it was bad, and more, it was good, and here's why. Or it was bad, and here's what I think you should do to fix it. Right. And so I'm not saying that if it was a time after, you're still not going to get, yeah, it was good, yeah, it was bad. Think of your favorite restaurant you ever eaten at. You're probably going to tell me it was good. It's your favorite restaurant. But can you tell me why? What was it? What is it that makes you be like, oh, that was delicious?
Well, I was going to bring it up in the last podcast, just talking about timing and feedback and being in a safe place to be able to ask it. But like it's tricky because it's probably a little safer to tell a restaurant if they ask you after you've had your meal and they send you a survey how the meal was. But isn't the more appropriate time to ask while you're eating it so that you can, now you might feel like, I'm not that type of person that's going to send my steak back or whatever food back. Maybe you are. And if they don't ask you, you don't get that chance. You maybe just don't come back to that establishment.
A fascinating insight into psychological safety, which is the fifth thing on this list. But psychological safety is purely how safe do I feel to do something or say something uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Right. Well, me telling the waitress that my food is not actually good, I don't think I've ever done that.
Mm-hmm.
Have I had crappy food? Yeah. But for whatever reason, I didn't feel psychologically safe enough to share that. Right. Now, I had very little to lose in there other than some uncomfortableness in that equation. And so it's a really good example of that, of even when a power dynamic is the same and there's nobody holding a bigger power disparity. And in fact, you probably are the one in the higher powered relationship in that situation. We still feel uncomfortable giving feedback, giving real honest feedback.
Well, apparently my younger brother, Sherrod, feels super psychologically safe at steakhouses because he will send it back if it is not perfect.
Send it back. Yeah, and there are going to be those people. In fact, that's a great thing. We get people all the time. We get feedback from all sorts of people. And it's like, no, you get feedback from the exact same people over and over again. That's a difference, right? That's not getting good feedback. That's getting highly skewed feedback by one person. Skewed feedback that you're more likely to ignore because you know it's from one person. And you know they're probably a little overbearing. When you can scale that down and provide a safe way for people to share, all of a sudden things open up. Look, people don't lie because they're dishonest. People lie because they're uncomfortable and afraid. In every instance. It does not matter what instance we talk about.
Yeah. Well, and does that mean that even the lack of giving feedback is that like the silence they're giving doesn't mean satisfaction? It means it's self-protecting. Like
often, you heard the phrase "silence is deafening."
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. If you are trying to gather feedback and you have a large pool of people to gather feedback from, and no one's willing to give any feedback, that's not psychological safety. That's not a culture that is happy. There's going to be someone upset. If you can't find anyone upset, you have a bigger problem. Right. That is maybe one of the most distinct signals that you have a problem, is when people are unwilling to say anything.
Yep.
I remember being recently married and having, I was gonna say hard conversations with my wife. They weren't even hard conversations as much as they were uncomfortable, because we didn't know how safe yet we were with each other, even being married. Right. And so there was just these awkwardness in conversations. And then after we had the conversation, be like, oh man, if we just had that conversation a while ago, it would have saved a whole bunch of random heartache and time. And I've got an angel for a wife that still have these, conversations all the time. And so I think it just shows that you have these even in your best relationships. And so if you're not getting feedback at all, that's not people that are, saying everything's good. That's people that have checked out because they're afraid, or checked out because they don't care. Either one is a bad signal for what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, as you were telling that story, the thing that popped in my head is a story I had heard, and it resonated with me because I would say, and Mark and Blake, you can probably chime in on this, but if I had to just say the one thing, the most quiet feedback loops of all of our clients, because they'll put out stakeholder surveys, client surveys, guest surveys, satisfaction surveys, those types of things are the most common. So the people that we're serving, that's usually the most direct survey, most common that we're giving. A lot of the organizations that we work with will also survey their employees. And I would say that is the quietest channel of feedback that comes in. It's hard. And the thing that popped in my head was Adobe. I had heard this recently. Adobe stopped doing their annual reviews where it's like a 300-page, hey, how's this? Where could you improve? How's your manager? All those things that come up in the annual review stuff. Number one, it takes like 2 hours. And then what I think the data shows is that oftentimes after a certain number of questions, people just start lying to get through it, or
100%.
whatever's going to get them their raise at the end of that annual review. And so Adobe looked at this, and to your story earlier, they implemented check-ins. Like, how much better would it have been if we had talked about this sooner? And they realized that, like, oh my gosh, like we get bombarded. I bet the HR person is like, no more annual reviews. I can't keep up with all of the complaints or things that we need to change from that year-end review. And think about that. If you're that HR person at Adobe and you can just get them as they trickle in, like, then we've, instead of trying to do 12 months of work in 1 month in January, now they can piece it out as it happens.
Totally. Not to make anyone listen to this podcast feel personally attacked, but it has always been insane to me that we will gather feedback in these industries on a yearly cadence.
Yeah.
Where it's like you're asking people to tell you how well you serve them in January and it's December. I don't remember legitimately what I had for breakfast yesterday.
Yeah.
How am I supposed to know how you served me in January?
On some of the populations that are served, it's sometimes uncommon that people stick with a regular email address or phone number. And so your real window of actually capturing feedback from those people, if you're doing it potentially 12, 11, 8 months later, chance of them actually getting that message or arriving to them is just so slim.
You know, think about it in this context. There's a whole bunch of things that we use that use feedback explicitly all the time, and we don't consider them this way. But think of a fire alarm, or maybe more correctly, think of a smoke detector, right? A smoke detector is a constant feedback cycle.
Mm-hmm.
It's checking the air for particles that come from smoke and notifying you everything's fine, right? This quietness is actually a type of notification that everything's good here. Unlike quietness in your own feedback loop where it's the opposite. But in this situation, everything's good.
To further elaborate on it, how often are you supposed to test those things?
Oh, I don't know, but don't tell my insurance I don't do it that often.
Once a month?
Yeah,
Once
right?
a month. I used to be in a little bit of that industry with those kind of automated systems, and hospitals automate those tests, or they pay someone to literally walk around with a broomstick and hit the test button. And it's way more often than they want it to be.
Yeah, funny enough, I actually bought online connected ones because we've had these conversations that will test it itself, right? They'll do it. But yeah, you're supposed to test them all the time, right? Because they're constantly looking for this. It's this constant queue trying to see if there's an issue.
The other analogy there is, and dang, they're annoying sometimes when the batteries run out or there's a problem with them. And it's the same with feedback. It is sometimes annoying to ask the same questions over and over and over again, but it's worth it.
Or to get the same responses, or to get responses that you don't feel like you can do anything with, or all sorts of things. Sometimes it is. Yeah. The real thing, though, I was thinking about this. Imagine how valuable a fire alarm, smoke detector would be if it checked once a year if something was on fire.
It better be dirt cheap,
Yeah.
so I can buy enough for one every day.
Yeah.
Buy 365 of them.
Yep, because really what you're getting, if you do surveys on a single day, right, you're getting feedback on how things were that day. Maybe if you're lucky, that week, right? That's why immediate matters so much. People often nail other things. They'll nail purposeful. They'll nail convenient. They'll nail scalable, which we'll talk about all those in a second. But by doing it a single day during the year, they have this illusion that it actually saves them time and money, when in reality, it's making it worthless. Like you said, it better be super cheap.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Because that's how much it's actually worth.
Yep.
Now, spread that out. Give a place for people to actually ask and answer every day, every minute, right? Those smoke detectors become invaluable. Literally, they will save lives. Feedback systems are the exact same. Without hyperbole, they will save lives if they are checked daily, hourly. If there is a place for people to give feedback that's going to be listened to and act upon, they can save lives in your organization.
100%. And they can be as simple, like oftentimes as we're setting things up with organizations, I think the common conception is that you have to have a very complex or like the silver bullet question. No, they can be super simple.
Yep.
How was your service? How was your interaction with staff? Whatever the case is, and it may seem boring, but it's almost that way on purpose.
Yep. There are good questions, there are bad questions, there are better questions. The only questions that I would say are truly awful are the ones that you just don't ask.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's the ones that are actively hurting your organization are the questions you're not asking. Everything else, there's degrees of how much they're helping. Right? Bad questions don't help that much, but they're going to help a lot more than the questions that are never asked. In fact, when we meet with people to build surveys, I now spend more time trying to convince them to start at the end. Begin with that end in mind. Tell me how you're going to use this feedback. Have you thought about that? Who's going to be reviewing it? What organization? What team? What committee? Who's going to be on the dashboard that gets to review it? How are you going to let people know the change you make? Spend your time and energy there, and then use your leftover ones to do the questions. Because once you got the first thing built, that's really the system. The questions are parameters. They're not the actual system.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you can change those as often as you need, and the engine will still run. But it's like obsessing over getting gas and then realizing I don't have an engine to put it in.
Just pouring out under the, or a gas tank.
Or a gas tank. You're very right.
Okay, so we've got, whether we have time to define all these or not. So we've got purposeful, immediate, convenient, scalable, psychologically safe. Maybe just for biggest bang for the buck here, which of these is going to be the hardest, or which has been the hardest for organizations to get right?
The interesting, I think, is the three that we've talked about.
Okay.
Being purposeful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being intentional about what you're asking. Having it be immediate right after service, and having it be psychologically safe. People often get convenience and scalability done.
Right.
And the reason why is because that's the easiest thing to outsource.
Yeah.
Right. When I say, hey, we're going to make it convenient, so we're going to send emails, we're going to send phone numbers, we're going to have QR codes, we're going to do kiosks, right? We're going to all do all these things that make it very convenient. People get that. That's kind of a solved problem, right? Technology solves that. We help solve that. That's part of what we do. The scalability part is also a solved problem. Technology solves that super well. And so groups get that because they can outsource it. They can say, hey, you guys are good at this. Do this thing for us. And it works. And it works incredibly well, right? We can provide a very convenient and a very scalable system to get feedback and to help you run feedback systems. What is much harder for us to do is to be able to help you be purposeful with it, to make sure it's immediate right after service. Now, nice little tidbit here, or maybe tip, kiosks work great for that because you can put them at the point of service. Anything that's at the point of service helps a lot with immediate feedback. But moving on, it's a lot harder to help you be purposeful in it and to help it be psychologically safe. Right. And so we use shortcuts to try and get there. Right. We have little secret tips and tricks that we teach people to try and that's frankly, this book is trying to help people be able to do that. But where people succeed the most are where they've outsourced it. And it's those other things they really need to work on and buy in on.
Yeah. And I would also, I guess, to your point, and maybe elaborate on a little bit further, is that purposeful part of it is the most important. And unfortunately, it's those outsourced things that get picked up. Even if you were to, we literally tell clients, hey, don't, unless you've done that purposeful part and planned out how you're going to use this and how you're going to close the feedback loop, don't do our service yet. It's going to be more harmful to start with that. And I would say the same thing goes, unfortunately, we see it all the time. Kick out a type form, Survey Monkey, Google form, All of those are just survey question tools. That's, go all the way back to the analogy of the car. That's just an instrument on the car that's being used, or tires, or an antenna, wherever you want to stick that in the car. But it is not as crucial as the steering wheel, to say, hey, where are we going and how are we going to get there?
Yep, 100%. I can't agree more with that statement. Something that I thought it was interesting as I was looking through kind of notes we had for this, is one of the things I'd written down is ask for feedback when the experience still has a pulse, right? Because oftentimes we're asking for feedback on dead experiences.
It's like you did a Pulse for Good pun right there.
Might need to change some of our marketing. Feedback on still
We
has a
really
pulse.
should use that. Note that marketing team.
No, but and then the fascinating thing is to just mix metaphors or analogies or whatever. We then beat a dead horse, right? Oftentimes of asking more and more about this thing that you can't change. Where if I can capture something in the middle, right? Which most of the time an experience is accumulation of events, right? It's not a single event. That's harder. When it's just a single event and there's nothing I can do about it, it's a harder interaction to change. Doesn't mean you can't change something. But when somebody, for instance, is visiting a doctor, I went to a doctor's appointment this morning. I have another doctor's appointment in a few weeks. I'm probably going to have another doctor's appointment after that because that's just how this works. Well, my experience is going to be the accumulation of those. And so if they can find out after the first one that something wasn't satisfactory, there's a good chance of being able to change it and make it better. However, if you wait till the very end and then do it, you're toast. That experience is dead and not going to be resurrected. And so then you're just banking on maybe their next experience, maybe is going to be better. When I'm thinking about my doctor, I don't ever want to go back there, right? Like I would prefer never to see that place again. They'd prefer never to see me again. And it's not because we don't like each other. It's that we don't want to see each other in that position. And so for even in the best intentions places, we need to be able to react as quickly as we can. Right. So I guess it comes back to that immediacy. Just again, I'm really harping on that, I suppose, at this point, but I think it is a powerful thing to think about.
Well, this actually lines up timing wise too perfectly. Before I get into the kind of closing and wrap, is I will go back. We are talking systems like the feedback system and process itself. Prior to that, last podcast, we talked about the trust. That is the foundation to this system. Start there and then build your system. And what lines up super well is it's January. It's the first of the new year. I've heard James Clear on like 6 podcasts. Ironic that he's on in January, probably planned. But his thing, if anyone, Atomic Habits, James Clear, he points out very well in his book that systems are so much stronger than willpower. And that's what your organization can look at is, hey, we know we want to do right by this. I don't think you're going to willpower your way into a serious feedback system and taking feedback seriously. I think you have to implement a system.
Yeah, I think the best way to think about the if you have a system or not is asking this question: does someone have to remember to do it? If you have to remember to do it, it's not a system.
Yep.
Right. That's going back to
willpower.
Yep. Going back to the atomic habit thing. The idea with the atomic habit is a habit is something you do without thinking, and you want to stack these habits on top of each other to make a system of living. Same thing's true with your feedback system. You want to build good feedback habits that no one has to remember to do. They just happen.
Yep.
That's a system.
Well, we'll leave that with you and see you in the next one.